Okay, now one of the most frequently asked questions for my little engine swap project is how did I get the 2012 blade clocks working on my 2004 bike, and what do you have to do to make it work? Now, rather than tell everyone a million times, I thought I'd do a little video and we'll cover how to actually do it. Now, a buddy of mine bought a set of these. Well, these are actually my old clocks. He's bought them off me. He's also got a 2004 bike, and this is the headlight loom off a 2004 bike. Now, to do this job, all you need is obviously the clocks. You need a headlight loom off the 2012 bike because that has the matching connector which fits in the clocks. Now, if you want to do the swap from a 2008 up to a 2012 bike, so the first of the RR8000s, all you need to do it is the clocks and the headlight loom. It's literally just a plug and play task to swap these clocks over on the early 1000 bike, the RR 2008 onwards bike. For an earlier bike than that, going back to the 2004 or even the 2006 2007 model, you need the headlight loom from that bike, which has a different connector. So basically all you have to do, cut that connector off, cut the connector off of the new 2012 loom and solder it on in its place. That's all you have to do to get it working. Things which don't work when you do this is the gear indicator. These later bikes have an inbuilt gear indicator that's down here on the screen. Now, you can't get that working because the later bikes actually have a switch inside the gearbox, and there's 6 different wires off it, so each gear has a different wire, and that's just not, you just can't retrofit that to the early bike. So you have to run a separate aftermarket gear indicator, which is what I did on my bike, and that works absolutely fine. Another thing which doesn't quite work is the speedo is slightly under reeds when you do this, because this speedo's expecting sort of gearing from the newer bike. So you may have to run a speedo healer to actually correct the speedo, if it bothers you too much. I never did, to be honest. Other things which don't work, all the fuel light works, but when the fuel light comes on the later bike, it tells you a countdown of how many miles you've gone over the reserve. Well, if you're running a 2004 bike, obviously it doesn't have that functionality. So your trip meter, when it goes into reserve, the trip automatically comes on. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't work, so it just stays at 0 and flashes at you on these ones. So that countdown of miles gone over since the reserve light came on doesn't work. But everything else is fully functional. The shift lights on these are programmable. So you can, because the early bikes redline about 1,000 or 1,500 revs earlier than the later bikes, you can actually change when the shift lights come on so they match the early bike. All the speedo, rev counter works, all the different things you can do with the rev counter, like the way you have it displayed differently, that all works. Everything else works, even the fault indicator flashing lights all work as well on the later dash. So all that other functionality is all intact and all fully works. Now, it took me a long time to find out what each of these wires do, the colours, comparing the wiring diagrams from the later bike to the earlier bike, and I made up a nice little spreadsheet which tells you what colour wires to connect where. Now, most of them are like for like. About 80% of the colours are like for like. Honda have kept the same colour wiring scheme from the earlier bikes to the later bikes, but there's a few wires which are different. Now, I'll make this wiring diagram available to download in a description if you want to attempt this. Just click on that and that will go through it. But as you can see, I'll flash it up on the screen. Almost everything's the same there. There's just a couple of ones which are a bit different. The ones at the bottom are the gear, let's say those gear wires I spoke about. Obviously you don't need any of those when you're transferring it over, they won't work anyway. Stuff on there which is different. There's not a lot which is different. I think some of the wiring codes are slightly different. I'll flash up a few of the differences so you can see it. But more or less it's like for like. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're actually going to do this modification on these on this now. As I say, my buddy wants this anyway, so we're going to do it. So first of all, first thing first is the scary bit, and that is cutting off your loom connector. Now, when doing this, I've stripped back some of the sleeving on here to expose it a bit more. Let's put that to one side a minute. I've stripped back some of the sleeving here and you can see the wires there. So try and push your rubber connector out of the way, because you want to leave a bit of, in case you ever need to swap back this original connector, you ideally want to give yourself a bit of room to reattach it if you ever have to in the future. You don't really want to make this a one-way transaction, because you never know when you may need to swap back again for whatever reason. I've got some really poor cutters, to be honest. I could do with some better cutters for doing this sort of thing. But what we do is, the point of no return is basically cut ourselves off here and leave, you know, a decent amount of tails on there. This is it now. There we go, we've done it. We've committed. So leave it like that, and if you ever need to swap back, you know, you've got enough on there to reconnect that again. So put it somewhere safe, don't lose it. That rubber boot won't fit the new connector anyway, so you may as well get that out of the way and put that with your connector. So there we have the wires from the RR4 blade, and what we'll do is the headlight loom from the 2012 bike, which I haven't stripped down yet. We'll strip that down and we'll cut that connector off as well. Okay, so there we are. I've cut off the connector from the 2012. There we have our 2004, and then it's a case of just joining these wires up. The connector, there you go, that will obviously fit into the connector on the clocks. I just made a very simple aluminium bracket to convert the bolt spacing so they work with my bike. For the 2008 blade, even the spacing of the clock mounts is exactly the same, so they bolt directly on to the 2008 bike without needing any brackets or anything fancy at all. So so now we need to strip these off and actually start the soldering. Now, as I mentioned before, there's certain wires on here you don't need because they're to do with the lap timer and the gear indicator. So find the ones you don't need. The ones you don't need is the yellow and pink, the black and yellow, the plain black, the plain brown, the plain red, and the black and orange. They're the ones you do not need. There's also two blues, which is really useful. One of the blues is for the high beam, and the other blue is for the 6th gear indicator. Now, because you don't have a clue which one is what, I actually joined both those together. So when you flash your high beam, the gear indicator reads 6th gear, and I tend to find my bike just stays as if it's in 6th gear all the time on the indicator, because there's no way of identifying which one of those two is the high beam one. You know, so they've used the same colour for two functions, which isn't very clever. There's also a light blue as well, but that's for the right turn indicator, so we know which one that one is. So we don't need any of these. So what I'd suggest you do, to save confusion, is just cut those a little bit shorter, half the length of all those. So they're cut out of the way. If you ever do need them again, you know, you can there's still enough there to connect onto. So get those out of the way, and then start stripping off and exposing the wires you're going to connect. So there we are. My wires are both stripped either side. I have my blues twined together here. The other wires which you have to double up on this are on the loom side, is the green and black need to be joined as well. There's two earths, whereas on the later bike there's only one earth. So there's two earths have to be joined, and that's it. Now, to do a proper job, I recommend investing in some heat shrink to put over each of these. This is sort of 3mm heat shrink, which is just about right to fit over those two wires. So cut yourself off sort of inch long segments, one for each wire, like so. There you go, you get the idea. And then on the long side, slip one of these over each wire. Get it out of the way, because when things get hot, you know, it won't shrink down before you want it to. So slide those down over each wire so you don't forget to do it, you know, later on. Twist the ends together. So do that to all the wires to start with before you go any further, so you don't forget. All wires stripped, heat shrink pushed onto every wire. As you can see, it's getting rather busy now. It's getting rather busy now. I mentioned before about the two blues joined together. Now, if I'd cut that, if I'd traced that through before I cut it with a meter, I probably could have found out which one of those was the actual high beam wire and which one was the gear indicator. But by joining them, if you have no gear indicator signal, the gear light just flashes all the time on the clocks. By joining it up with the high beam, it will stop it flashing at least and just keep it in 6th gear. So, you know, I could have traced that out, I could have identified it, but by joining it, you cure the flashing gear indicator issue. So in some ways it's better to actually join that rather than trace it out and find the right one. So anyway, so let's start connecting this up now. So where to start, basically? Where to start with this? It's just really a case of get going with it. Just get started. Let's go through it now. So the ignition wire is the brown and white wire on here. So we're looking for the brown and white. There is the brown and white. Brown and white. Now I suggest you double check the wires because, you know, there's a lot of very close colours here. There's a brown and black there. So make sure you have the brown and white wire. Brown and white wire goes to the brown and white wire on here, so it's the same colour wire, same colour coded wire, brown and white. There it is, right here. So there's a couple of different ways you can do this. I could tin them up, hold them in together like that, and then solder them. Or you can do the old twist around trick, whereby you twist it around and around the wire, which it's slightly better, I think, because it gives a bit of physical, as well as just relying on the solder, you've actually got a physical connection there with the two wires twisted together. So you get your wires twisted together, take your soldering iron, and I'm no soldering expert, this is the way I've just figured it out basically. Heat your wires up. Probably all you soldering people are probably saying, oh my god, what the hell are you doing? It's the worst bit of soldering I've ever seen. Keep it to yourself, yeah, we don't want to know about how good you are at soldering. I don't want any soldering comments saying, oh god, what have you done to that? You've balls that right up. So push your heat shrink over. If you just give it a little squeeze, where it's so hot, it will sort of keep it in place really. Push it over there. Take a heat gun and heat it up. We'll put it on low, and then just apply a bit of heat on it. And there we go. One wire done. Another 26 to do. There we are. All done. All done. Had a few confusing moments with this. It's had some wires obviously left over which weren't needed, which I didn't account for. Also the white and red, I couldn't find a white and red on here, and the white and red is for the immobiliser, and it took me a while to realise that there's no white and red on the bike loom wire because it's an American ECU, sorry, an American bike this is going on, so it doesn't have the HISS immobiliser, so that's why I couldn't find the white and red. But I think all the others are all connected up now. You also don't need the illumination. There's an illumination wire on the RR4 to light the clocks up at night. But the later clocks work just from the positive signal they get, any of the positive power feed they get. Don't need a separate illumination. So I didn't need the brown and the white. You have to join up, there's two earths which you have to join up together. And I think that was all the confusing points there were. So there we go, all joined, nicely heat shrunk over all the wires. So what we're going to do now is wrap that with a bit of tape first of all, and then we're going to put some of my nice sleeving on there. There we are, job done, and then we will test it and make sure it works. So here we go. Okay, that's the clocks now all connected. So we'll turn the ignition on. I've got keyless ignition on my bike, so I have a little module. Turn it on, flashes up, all the lights come on, all the warning lights seem to come on there. Let's turn it off again just to check that. Turn it on. Yeah, we've got all the warning lights then. The steering damper light didn't come on, but that's alright. Neutral, let's pop it into gear. That goes out. The sixth gear light came on, which I said it might. Flash the high beam light works. I can't start it, so I can't check the rev count, unfortunately. The temperature should start to register when the bike gets over 40 degrees, but I can't change it to check that. But looks good. That's it. Basically, 2012 clocks are installed. Beautiful. Hold both buttons down, turn it on, and it will take you into the setup mode of the rev counter. Now we want the revs to come on, I think 11.5. I think it's 11,500 the rev limit comes in on this, so 11.6, hit the button again, and then when do you want it to start coming in from? And that's from about 10.5, so I think that's about right. That's when the lights will start coming on. Hit the set again. Then the next option you've got is to change how bright you want the shift lights. We have all the as bright as possible. How you want your gear change to look, like that, with just a little bit going up and down, a bit hard to read, or backwards, or just without a little bit like that, or backwards like that. Bit weird again. I think we have like that, which is the coolest option. And there we are, all done. New clocks fitted, ready to be sent off to some lucky RR4 owner. Brilliant. It can be done if you're willing to mess about.